Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Welcome to your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and our guest today is no stranger to the show. He's the former teacher and director of Xavier High School in Chuuk, also probably best known as the former director of the Research Pastoral Institute known as Micronesian Seminar and Jesuit Mission Superior in Micronesia for 6 years. In short, beloved teacher and friend, Father Francis X. Hezel, Society of Jesus. Welcome back.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be back. Always is. Thanks.
You always have something brewing in the pot, and we're here today to talk about your latest film.
Yes, you're right. It's part of a work ethic that I sort of imbibed when I was very young. Workaholism, I think it's called. But I decided that since I've spent my life here in Micronesia, I might just as well continue the work.
Yes.
So although we have finished, I thought we finished doing this series on the history of Micronesia, nothing is ever really finished. So we're delving into prehistory now, particularly prehistory of the Marianas, and that's what this latest film is about.
It's called Before We Began Counting Years, and it starts when?
It starts working backwards. So it starts with the latte period. It starts at 1000 AD, but it goes tick, 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 tick backwards to 1500 BC. That's 3,500 years before the present. So it goes back 2,500 years beyond when people usually start thinking of Marianas history as beginning. You know, the big latte stones and all that.
So this is the time when the Marianas was first settled, basically, by the people who eventually became the Chamorros. And just point of reference, I believe this is also about the time when the Sphinx was built. I see a lot of these timelines or something where it says like Marianas was settled, and then underneath it is the Sphinx was built in Egypt.
Yeah, I didn't know. We did a timeline at the beginning of this thing. I'm not any kind of an authority on the Sphinx, but I can tell you that it's about the time that Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees and began to move on to the Promised Land.
Well, of course, you would know that, of course, being a Jesuit priest. What is the biblical... Well, that's interesting also. Okay. Yeah. So this is the time. Do you want to work backwards then? How does the film open up? What did you decide to lead with?
Well, what we led with was the latte stones, because we figure everybody knows what they represent.
Yeah.
And they should know about when they started. But we scanned a latte stone site and then went underground and then followed this thing vertically down, 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 till we get to the point where, meanwhile, the timeline is going on, and we get to the point where we're 1,500 years before Christ. So we're at a point when no place in the remote Pacific was inhabited. One thing that people don't understand, and one thing that we were hoping to bring to them with this video, is that the Marianas has a distinction of being the first part of remote Oceania to be settled.
Oh, I thought it was just the first part of Micronesia.
No, it's remote Oceania. What that means is remote Oceania means every place except those few islands that you could practically swim to during the last ice age. So in other words, Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea, there was almost a link between Southeast Asia, a land link between Southeast Asia and Papua New Guinea. When you got to the water, you'd get in your dugout canoe and paddle, until you got to that island over there. And if it turned out to be a small island, then you get in the canoe on the other side and paddle until you got to PNG. PNG, of course, is a rather large place, and you went up into the mountains and settled and continued to speak your language for the next 3,000 years. That's why Papua New Guinea has 700 languages, and it's why its people are so distinct from other Pacific Islanders.
Let's talk a little bit about the theory of how the Marianas was settled. Which theories do you cover in this film?
Well, the thing that seems to be pretty clear is that the Austronesian family, language family, in other words, the people who spread out throughout Oceania, originated in Taiwan. I mean, there doesn't seem to be too much question about that. You can go to the southern parts of Taiwan even today, and you'll see people who remind, at least I did, who remind me a lot of Outer Island Yapese. Not the garb only, but the weavings that they do, and the material cultural elements that they have very much remind you of that. But these people were the people who some years ago, well, let's say 2,000, 3,000 years before Christ, began moving south and settling in through the Batanes Islands into the Philippines and then down into Indonesia. So they were the ones who were settling throughout Southeast Asia and eventually spreading out into the Pacific. Except that the first spread into the Pacific, even before they got to Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, even before they got to the Admiralty Islands, the first place that they settled seems to be the Marianas. So,
you mentioned the Philippines, and there's a strong tie between the ceramics of the Marianas redware and what they found in the Philippines. For those that aren't familiar, what is the pottery? Can you describe the pottery that the Marianas is known for?
Aha, you've been doing your homework.
Aha.
Yep, it's got that. There is a strong similarity there. It's called Marianas redware. It's called Marianas redware, and although I don't know the terms for this thing, I'm not a pottery expert. It is there are white lines and dots, so it's punctuated, if you want, with certain designs around the lip of the pots. The pots are all kind of small. They're thin, so they're not big, heavy things. They're about maybe a foot wide or so, a foot in diameter. Only a foot in diameter, so you're not going to feed a gigantic family that way off this pot. Were they ceremonial? We're not sure, but we have a pretty good idea what they look like from pieces that have been found. And the Philippines and Marianas pottery are very similar.
Mm.
That's not the only thing that's similar, by the way.
And what's so cool is, well, I'm not sure about the Marianas redware, right? Because that was a rather fine pottery, but you can still find the larger pottery from the ancient Marianas today when you're walking through the woods or on the beach.
But that pottery that you tend to find these days is latte period pottery,
right?
Mostly. Latte period pottery is a lot bigger, and it's a lot cruder. You know, you would think it was the other way around. You'd think that you go from crude stuff to very fine, decorated stuff, but that's not right. You know, it's the pottery developed so it was ceremonial originally, and it became just functional. You know, just something to pour rice into and boil it, or whatever, cook pigs or whatever.
Feed more people because it was bigger.
That's right.
Yeah,
more people around the islands. Yeah.
So I understand you looked at 3 or 4 different sites as part of this film. Can you tell us about what the sites were and what are some particular things at them?
We started out at Ritidian. We started out at Ritidian because in Guam, not that that's the earliest site, it's not. It would seem that some of the earliest sites, interestingly, are here in Saipan. And the Ritidian sites and some of the sites, the one in Mangilao, and sorry, not the one in Mangilao, but there's another site up north in Guam, and a site over in the west part of the island, the lee side of the island, near one of the hotels that was being built. So that would be Tumon. These sites are good. Probably the strongest there is Ritidian. The Tinian has a couple good sites. They have in here. I'm gonna blank. It's Tulu.
Unaitsulu?
Unaitsulu.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that is one of the sites. We didn't visit that, but that's one of the sites there. Another one is the House of Taga.
Of
Now,
course.
House of Taga is a Latte period site, but underneath that is a much deeper, they've excavated more deeply there, and they found strong evidence of a pre-Latte settlement. And then, of course, in Saipan, you've got the sites here.
You've been studying Micronesia for decades. In making this film, did you have any aha moments, or anything new or fascinating or curious or something that created more questions for you?
Well, I think what I see is that, shall I say this or not?
Yeah.
Okay. What I see is that people hang on desperately to perceived truths about their history. The perceived truths aren't always supported by a whole lot of evidence. I saw that initially when I got interested in the Marianas. It was about the time of the Spanish Christianity, the coming of Christianity. And I remember, even before I knew anything at all about it, reading the old accounts, the books, Paul Carano's book and Beasley's book, on the history of the Marianas, and saying, this seems a little mythic to me. Are you sure that 80,000 people were killed, in this period of time? And I spent a little time examining records and pondering this, and I began to find that the old myths didn't satisfy me, at least. So I felt it was part of my responsibility to dissent, to offer evidence that might open up these questions again. And this is what I've done here. This is what I've tried to do, simply because there's so much identification of Chamorro culture and everything with latte stones and latte stone period of time, that what we wanted to do was say, your history goes back a lot further than that, and it's a lot richer than that. And so let's take account of the whole thing. Let's take account of the whole thing, and let's see, because in doing that, if you look a little bit more closely, you're going to find some stuff that the Marianas Visitors Bureau, can really tout. Like the longest ocean voyage was made around the time of the original settlement of the Marianas. I mean, that was an enormous achievement. You're not just going 200 or 300 miles or something like this. You're traveling 1,100 miles over open ocean against the winds and finding this group of islands and settling them. That
took a lot of courage. Number one,
yeah.
Aside from the technology.
Well, or either courage or frustration at how bad the family was that you were leaving, or how mean your older brother was.
In the NMI history book written by or compiled by Don Farrell, it mentions some of the possible causes for people to have made this migration, and one of them is war.
Yeah.
Or some other theories are lack of food or stuff like that. So it'd be interesting.
But it could be war. It could be war, but I have to say that if they did come from the Philippines, there probably wasn't time to develop the kind of warring parties, oppositions that you that would have put the pressure on people to flee. Remember that one of the things that we've been unable to find, besides animal bones, among the residue left from the pre-Latte people, was any kind of implements of war. We don't have sling stones. We haven't been able to find anything that's called weapons. All those are from a later period of time. Possibly it was kumbaya time, everybody all got along well, or possibly there weren't enough people, to get angry at.
Yeah.
But to go back to that question, why did they leave? I always thought that one big motivating force is not just war, but annoyance at the family. Get away as far as you can. If it means traveling 3 months to the east in the face of headwinds. Great. That's a small price to pay. Because there's no injury that hurts as much as injury in the family, and particularly the denial of something that a younger brother feels is coming to him. We've got a little suggestions, not strong evidence, but little suggestions that this was a motivating force in other parts of the Pacific. But it seems so Pacific Island style that it was, why not? Huh?
We're speaking today with Father Francis X. Hezel about his latest film, Before We Began Counting Years, and we'll be back after this break.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizuus Maasi, Olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. Our guest today is Father Francis X. Hezel. And you know what, Father Fran, I just noticed that Xavier is your middle name, and it's also the name of the Xavier High School in Chuuk where you first taught when you came out. Wow, is that serendipity or what?
Well, I don't know, but my father's name was Francis Xavier also, so I think I got it from him. But that wasn't just a chance name. He came from a Jesuit parish in Buffalo, New York, and Jesuit parishes were, this parish was St. Anne's Parish, but Francis Xavier was a strong figure there, and a strong figure in the Pacific because he was, after all, the patron of missions.
Wow.
He was the one who was, he wasn't the first Jesuit to go overseas, but certainly one of the first. 1540 or something like that, he began, never made it to China, which was his dream, made it to Japan, spent some time in India, in the Molucca Islands, and prepared the way for the advances even further into the Pacific by San Vitores and other of his disciples.
Wow, so you have a namesake that you kind of sort of followed in the footsteps of.
Yeah, except that he was, the truth is, I've never adopted him as my personal model. He's a little bit too remote.
What do you mean?
Well, there are people that he doesn't seem to be human.
Oh.
He's a saint, all right, but he doesn't have those. I don't. Perhaps this is because I haven't read enough about him, but some of the Jesuits are people who get mad, once in a while, or make wrong decisions, and
you mean they're human?
Yes, that's what I've. Yes, that's right. And some of the people are more like this. There's people particularly in the New World, in New Mexico and Arizona, who were of that sort.
Oh, so you feel that you couldn't live up to his perfection?
I think that there's a type of saints that we used to venerate in the past, like Saint Stanislaus, Saint Aloysius, Gonzaga. I think they were wonderful people, but they didn't seem to me to most of us, to be models. They didn't live through the mess that we lived through, or at least it didn't seem to be a mess. They were always guided, it seemed, by this light that pointed them just in the right direction. They didn't have the complications of life that assail most of us. Mm-hmm. We have to steer our way through these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose that's why I never developed a devotion to him. Although in our family we did do the Novena of Grace to him and Saint Ignatius for 9 days before the date in which they were canonized. That's in March sometime.
Ooh. I hope to have the opportunity to talk to you more about your life in general. Let's acknowledge the people that kind of helped make this film possible that you've worked on. I'm sure you worked with a lot of people over the years with many things, but in particular, who was important for Before We Began Counting Years?
Well, I started off with working with Teresa Matanane and Fred Rodriguez from Guam. They work at a studio called Greenlight Productions, and they have a channel in Guam. We started off working together. As time went on, we didn't meet so frequently. You know, they became more management people. Although Fred did do some of the shooting. And they did bring along a person, Everett, forget his last name, but who came here to Saipan to do the shooting on this island the week we were here. But the person who's done most of the editing is Len Tenorio. He's done a lot of the shooting, the interviewing, and he's done all the editing, virtually all the editing. He's a talented person, and he and I have worked together over the last year or so, fine-tuning this thing, and I hope turning it into something that people will appreciate watching. I want to also add that Saipan was especially supportive of this. Now, I'm not just saying this because I'm on Saipan radio, but they were. I didn't get a nickel from Guam. The Guam Preservation Fund, nothing there. Guam Visitors Bureau, nothing there. CAHA, no. But up here, the Humanities Council helped us out, and they were the big support for us. Although we got some money too, we got a little bit of money also from Best Sunshine. So I do want to, I want to make sure that somewhere in the course of this interview I thank the people here for their confidence in this project.
The Northern Marianas Humanities Council recently provided for a public screening of the film. For those that missed that, how can they see it?
Well, we hope to leave some copies here, so I'm hoping that it'll be shown on public TV. That's my fond hope.
You've actually been involved, I read, in over 70 other films, the production of 70 other films.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes, we were doing that for Micronesian Seminar. We were, I always tell people that the best ideas in Micronesian Seminar came from people in the staff, not from me. So one day we got a person we called Smiles because he never smiled. American whose wife was, he's a house husband, you know. So he's got he came in and gloomily he suggested that maybe we should do something on video because people had TVs. You know, there was a local TV station channel that was looking for stuff to produce, and he said I could help with that. You know, I said, okay, let's do it. We got some equipment. No, I think we used his equipment at first. He went out and he did something called Voices of Ponape. It was a 1-hour thing on the prehistory of Ponape. So that began, and pretty soon we were doing half-hour documentaries, not just documentaries, but programs that were aimed to deal with diabetes, blood sugar, things like HIV, and so forth. And we tried to do these in such a way that they would be entertaining as well as informative. My imagination was that there was an 8-year-old kid who was holding the control. And the minute we lost this 8-year-old kid, the screen was going to go blank.
I love that.
You know, so unless we kept that 8-year-old kid interested in this thing, you know, we weren't going to be able to do it, no matter what kind of wonderful message we thought we might have for the public.
That's a great philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to ask you to name your favorite child, but out of all of those films, are there any in particular that are especially close to your heart?
Yeah, there's first of all is the series that we did on the history of Micronesia. It's a 7-hour, 5-disc series. It's on the history of Micronesia. From the first population of the place, you know, the stories about the first population, up through independence for the countries and the Covenant. We've got some good pictures, actually, of the Covenant here. And wonderful footage from some of the people, the local people here who were involved in that. So if people haven't had a chance to see that, at least watch the last of them, which is on self-government. Actually better to watch the whole series at some point or other. They're still playing that, by the way, in most of the places in Micronesia. I still get comments on that. So last week when I was in Ponape, people said, "Oh, I was watching TV 2 nights ago, and I saw you." I said, "What was that?" And they said, "Oh, it was this nice thing about the history of." Great. You know,
How long ago did you make that?
We made that. That project was finished in 2009.
Wow.
It took about 3 years, 4 years, and it was with the help of Historic Preservation Office.
Mm-hmm.
So National Park Service was very kind to us, and so were the entities in throughout Micronesia in helping to make this possible. So that was one of the favorites. The other favorite was something called Living the Sweet Life. It was a story. It was a little drama, funny little drama, about a big heavy guy who's sitting there at a table, you know, eating chicken and all the wrong. It was all of, aside from chicken, it was all the wrong foods, you know, and plenty of it, and ice cream and everything. And his friend comes in and says, they start a conversation. They begin talking about, I don't know what it is, health. The friend tells him that he'd been to the doctor. And it's the two different trajectories that people take who are suffering from diabetes. This guy sitting at the table, and this other person who has it, who decides that he's going to adopt a regime of exercise and, you know, proper dieting and so forth. So that was one that people like. They keep coming back to again and again.
Do you think it's because of, in part because of, it sounds like it's humorous.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's got the thing we learned also is don't take yourself so seriously when you're doing things like this, you know. To tease a little bit, huh? You know, human papilloma virus is an enormous, come on. You know, we've got to make people connect with this somehow or other. You know, let's find an entree point here. Once we do that, then we can say whatever we want. You know, providing it's not too stern and solemn.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that, I mean, I'm not trying to put any pressure on you. You just started screening this most recent film, but what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I don't think that until I'm laid to rest, I don't think I can't see myself as stopping, you know, this thing, or at least ceasing to act in an advisory role for people who are doing this. I'm finding that I would like to do prehistory. I'd like to continue that. I'd like to do things that, I'd like to emphasize two things. I'd like to do prehistory, parts of the past that haven't been written about. So let's say, take another example from Micronesia. My fond hope sometime was to do something on the contacts, the early contacts, the relationship between Palau and Yap. You know, people say, oh, the Yappies got stone money in Palau. And you say, yes, and then there's much more to the story than this. And there's much more to the story that has been explored, but it's never been publicized. And we need to do that. The second thing I would like to do is take oral history and fabricate something that approaches a sensible, integral history of a certain period in a certain place. So, for instance, in Chuk, suppose you got people who knew something about clan histories. There was a settlement. There was supposedly oral history says that there were two canoes that came in. Sowaniras and Sokachao came in. But there's variations on how these people were related to one another. And there's variations on what happened after that. Okay, these were supposed to be chiefly figures, and they started one of the clans, Saputapi clan, around Chuk. But that isn't the end of the story. There's also other origin stories. I bet that if we wanted to, and we had cooperation from people who are used to keeping their mouths shut about what is considered family lore, we could do something real interesting, something that I don't think would create civil war. It'd provoke an argument or two, but what the heck, you know, that's collateral damage. That's, get people talking about this kind of thing. Because history isn't something that's ready-made. History is something that every generation has to contribute to. So my point is to try to help people along in this, to say this is not an impossible task. You can start with what we've left here, That's not the final product by any means. Blessings, continue the work, and develop your history that way. The other thing is to say, as I've suggested, that oral history should not be discounted. That oral history can be the materials, the fabrics, from which this kind of a history can be made. But it's got to be looked at critically, much more critically perhaps than people are accustomed to looking at it. So all of these things, I think, are in mind. To examine, to help people to get in the habit of examining their past, because as they build up an identity, as they build up also a sense of where they've been or where they've come from. That's important, a key element in determining who we are as a people.
Uncle Lino Olapai always mentions that proverb, so to say, in order to know where you're going, you must look behind. Navigationally, look
That's
at the
right.
stars behind you.
That's right. That's good. That's true. And I always say that the same thing, that you chart your way into the future by, looking back, looking forward, looking back, looking forward. Mm-hmm. And that's a pattern that you have to continue in our life's voyage.
Our guest today has been Father Francis X. Hezel, Society of Jesus. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.